Ski lifts are impressive mechanical devices that almost all of us have taken for granted. For many, these are just ways to get up the ski hill and nothing more. But did you know that they're not used solely at ski resorts? Or how about that the manufacturing of these machines is primarily a duopoly? And what about the fact that some of them can even turn? We'll cover all of these scenarios and more today as we discuss 10 fun facts about ski lifts most people don't know. Before we begin, let's go through a little background on this video. You can skip to the time on screen to get straight to the fun facts. Now, some of the most dedicated SRG skiing fans will remember a video that originally came out in May of 2021, almost exactly 4 years before this video. That video was a short 3-minute summary of the basics of ski lifts and was actually originally scripted in French for a school project. We've had the idea to follow up with a volume 2 of that video for a while now, and we finally decided that the 4-year mark was the perfect timing and officially put it on the schedule last September. Unfortunately, as many of you have probably seen, one particular channel that has a much further reach than ours beat us to the punch purely by chance. So to avoid redundancy, we're going to do something a little different today. If you haven't seen that video already, we would highly recommend giving it a look after this. It's linked in the description. But rather than going over the basics of ski lifts, which that video covers in plenty of detail, we're going to go over all those little things that a lot of people don't even know exist. If you guys want a more technical breakdown of how exactly circulating ropeways, those being mostly chairlifts and gondolas, work, let us know in the comments. For the obvious disclaimer, we are not mechanics or lift engineers and do not have the technical expertise as such. This video was written off of years of external research, but be aware that this video may contain errors due to our lack of formal expertise in the field. Alright, let's start off with my personal favorite. They can turn, and not only that, they can do it in multiple different ways. Ski lifts, by nature, run in a straight line. The haul rope is looped around a bull wheel at each end and is then tensioned to run perfectly straight between the two ends. The support towers are all in a line, and the carrier, which is the technical term for anything suspended from the rope, travels as the crow flies from point A to point B. Because ropeways are primarily used for aerial transit, there typically isn't a need for a lift to turn. But every now and then, issues with land ownership, prevailing winds, or available terrain can necessitate a turn. The most common way to turn a ski lift is through a mid-station, which can only be accomplished on a detachable. In the detachable mid-station, the carrier detaches from the rope, turns, and then reattaches. The rope itself is turned separately, or sometimes there are separate haul ropes for each stage of the lift. This method also adds the benefit of enabling midway loading, unloading, or both. However, its major drawback is cost, and as such, this method is reserved solely for when an operator needs the loading or unloading capability or needs to make a drastic change in alignment. While detachable midstations account for a vast majority of ski lift turns, a much rarer method is to deflect the haul rope through what are known as canted shivs. A shiv is a wheel that is on a tower that either supports or holds down the haul rope. These are almost always aligned perfectly vertically and serve solely to affect the vertical profile of the lift. However, if you look closely on a select few lifts, such as the Silver Strike Express at Deer Valley, the Cabriolet at Park City, or the Coney Express at Snowmass, you'll notice that the top part of the lift doesn't quite line up with the bottom half, being off by just a few degrees. If you can identify the towers at which the shivs are canted, typically a series of alternating support and hold down towers in close succession, you may notice that rather than vertically, the shivs are at a slight angle. While we may be no physics professors, a little imagination or modeling with your hands can reveal how this change can help shift the haul cable a few degrees into a different direction. This method can be applied on either detachable or fixed grip lifts and is almost always to avoid buildings or to respect land boundaries. One of the most infamous examples of canted shivs is the monstrosity on Alta's Supreme lift, but this prototype has caused excessive wear, and as such is being removed this summer as the Supreme lift is realigned into a straight configuration. The final method of turning aerial lifts is to take shivs and put them completely sideways. This is by far the rarest method, and the only example we've personally ridden is the Snowflake Double at Breckenridge. Because of how the grip sticks out to the left side of the cable, making a right-hand turn with sideways shivs works fine, but it wouldn't work for the downhill side, which has to turn left, as the grip would conflict with the shivs. As such, the downbound chairs on Snowflake instead make two rights in a triangular configuration to get into the correct alignment. It looks complicated from afar, but upon a minute of study, it's not horribly difficult to understand. Now, you may have noticed throughout this video that I've used the word rope and refrained from the word cable. While many will use the word cable without second thought, this is actually erroneous, as these types of devices we're discussing do not feature a cable. Obviously, it's not a big deal to refer to it as a cable, and many in the industry refer to it as a cable quite regularly. However, ski lifts and everything that falls under the umbrella are known officially as ropeways, and that's for a reason. That which the carriers hang from is made up of metal wires twisted into strands, and then those larger strands are themselves twisted around a core into what is, by definition, a rope. This is why one of the final stages of assembling a ski lift is the haul rope splice, as if it were a pure cable, a simple weld job would do the trick. Again, this is all purely semantics, and you can find us using cable throughout many of our other videos. On this same topic of ropes, while a vast majority of aerial ropeways only feature one rope, some feature 2 or even 3. There are a plethora of reasons for this, and actually a handful of different ways of applying it. You've got funitels, which feature 2 ropes a fair distance apart with the carrier suspended below and between them. You've got good old-fashioned trams, in which there are 2 extremely thick ropes that serve effectively as stationary tracks, while the third smaller rope is actually responsible for the movement of the carrier. There are many ways to use additional ropes, but they're typically used to counter one big challenge ski resorts often face: wind. With 2 ropes a distance apart, a multi-rope design can significantly increase the operating threshold of a lift. Interestingly, directly counter to the previous fact, these are often referred to as bicable or tricable systems. When most people think of ski lifts, they think of chairlifts. Some think of gondolas, but there is something that these two, along with many other less common forms of ski lifts, have in common. You sit. Those who have not ever ridden a tram, cabriolet, 3S, or funitel before may be a bit surprised after boarding any such of this type of lift. In these particular cases, along with some others not mentioned, you are allowed or sometimes forced to stand. This can be a little interesting given the nature of how ski lifts move up and down, over and under the towers, and can sway in the wind. However, on the bigger lifts, this is generally minimized by the sheer size of the cabins. The notable exception here is a cabriolet, which is effectively a gondola that you stand in. There are less than a dozen of these worldwide because they're not very practical except as inter-village transit and applications like that. And as such, many people aren't aware that there are indeed ski lifts that you stand in. Now, this video says ski lifts in its name. We've used the word ski nearly 24 times to this point. So if you haven't yet figured out, these machines are almost exclusively used at ski resorts. Almost. Those who aren't very familiar with this type of transit will be surprised to learn that aerial ropeways are used in a variety of other settings outside of the snow sports industry. Several cities in Central and South America have them integrated as part of their public transit network. In the United States, you can find them at a handful of fairs, zoos, and parks all over the place. They make for fantastic sightseeing lifts because they can cover terrain other forms of transportation cannot, which is also why they are employed in the places they are as public transit. We'll keep this little segment brief since this is all pretty self-explanatory, but next time you travel somewhere new, see if you can find a zoo with a gondola or a sightseeing chairlift. They're more common than you might think. The basic premise of a ski lift is this. We have people, some pretty rugged terrain, and we need to get them from point A to point B in an efficient way. Does this sound like another industry to anybody else? If you weren't able to guess, this perfectly describes mining. We've got all this heavy ore at the top of the mountain, and we need to figure out how to get it across this rugged terrain to point B all the way over there. So it should come as no surprise that the first aerial ropeways came from the mining industry several hundred years ago. Ropeways have developed from gravity-powered buckets sliding down a rope into these huge, circulating behemoths with luxury DCD chairs and protective plastic bubbles. If you look closely at many Rockies resorts, you'll find traces of mining heritage all over the place. Trail names, random artifacts, entire mines on the National Register of Historic Places. Okay, that last one might be a little unique. But nonetheless, it is almost always lost on people just how much the mining industry of the past shaped the snow sports industry of today. In conjunction with the word ropeway, we've used the modifier aerial several times. However, not all ropeways are aerial. Ropeways are any form of transportation that involves a carrier being propelled by a rope. Thus, when you have chairs hanging from a cable, that's a ropeway. But you know what's also a ropeway? A train that's pulled by a rope from underneath, known as a funicular. The lines of this do start to get fuzzy, however, when you look at examples such as the Detroit Airport's express tram. This was a joint venture between Otis, the elevator company, and Poma, the biggest ropeway company in the world. And it is cable-driven. But if we include the express tram in the category of ropeways, does that then also lend itself to saying that the San Francisco cable car network is also a ropeway network? It gets quite convoluted. Just know that you could be on a ropeway and never even know it. That's to say that you don't have to be 60 feet in the air to be on one. Now, getting a little bit more specific, let's talk about chairlifts. Nowadays, most chairlifts have devices to keep you in the chair in the case of unexpected stops and such. Call it what you want, a comfort bar, footrest, safety bar, or just the bar. These colloquialisms all refer to the same thing. It's a bit of a contentious topic, putting down the bar, at least in the western United States. But believe it or not, on some chairlifts, you don't get a choice. On some chairlifts, you have no control of the bar at all. This here is the Burns Express at Deer Valley, at which the bar comes down before the chair even leaves the terminal. It locks in place, and then in the top terminal, just before unloading, it raises on its own. While this technology has only had limited implementations, typically on beginner lifts, it is becoming more prevalent each season. In 30 or 40 years, we may eventually be at the point where it's not even possible to have an argument about the bar. Let's zoom way out now and talk about the industry as a whole. With all these different types of lifts in different locations and utilizations all across the globe, it would make sense that there are dozens of different companies who make them. While this is true, there are only two groups that, together, share a huge percentage of the market. The first of these is the Doppelmayr-Garaventa group, with branches such as Doppelmayr USA, who constructed the lift you're seeing now, and Garaventa, who is the dominant tram manufacturer in the world. The other, even larger group is the HTI group. This group includes huge branches like the French company Poma, who constructs a vast majority of all lifts in Central and Southern Europe, and the Italian giant Leitner, who manufactured this chairlift on screen. Then there's the creatively named American branch. Take a guess on the name. If you guessed Leitner Poma, you'd be correct. They own a large share of the North American market and built this chairlift. There are a number of defunct manufacturers, the most notable being Riblet, who built many fixed-grip chairlifts like these. Another notable one is Yan, who drove themselves out of business by advancing a little bit too fast with their detachable chairlifts, such as the one seen here, which was retrofitted by Poma. Looking at the timelines of mergers, acquisitions, bankruptcies, and all the other fun stuff among lift manufacturers could form an entire video of its own, but at the current moment, it's primarily just the companies contained within those two groups that design and construct a vast majority of the world's ropeways. The final fun fact I have to share with you is a standard chairlift, that seemingly mundane high-speed quad you ride without a second thought, can cost more than a private jet. Take a guess at the cost of this lift on screen, and keep in mind that it has 3 terminals rather than the traditional 2. The actual final cost was about $16.5 million. With that kind of money, you can buy a Gulfstream G280, a mid-sized private jet, or in other words, a personal flying ski lodge for you and your entire family. Some of you may not appreciate these numbers quite as much as we do, but in our opinion, those price tags are significantly higher than we would guess if we didn't have any knowledge of this industry. Alright, those are our favorite fun facts about ski lifts. I'm sure we forgot some, so let us know of your favorites down below. Of course, as always, please leave any questions down below as well. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please consider subscribing to help support this dream. Thank you all so much for watching. All my love, I'm out.